Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a customer engineer focused on management technologies. Today's discussion is part 7 of an ongoing series focused on endpoint protection in Configuration Manager, which of course is part of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. The topic of today's session will be to focus on Windows Defender Application Guard policies that are available for configuration of Application Guard through Configuration Manager. So to kick this off, always want to start with setting some context about why we are discussing this, right? Well, always it's really about raising awareness about features that are in Configuration Manager, features that frankly other teams like the security team could use to manage things that they care about. In the environment, these are built-in capabilities. In this case, Windows Defender Application Guard is part of Windows 10. So it just makes sense to take a look at what can be done with Application Guard, the potential cost savings that might be part of that. You may be already licensed for this anyway. So taking a look at it, understanding it is a big deal. Also, in the vein of this is a security feature, it could be that your security teams want to leverage this and can through role-based access controls that are part of Configuration Manager. So this one is also an interesting session because, as discussed in other of the endpoint installments, the focus of this session is not to go into great, huge detail about Application Guard. No, the focus of this session is to discuss how Endpoint Manager, Configuration Manager in this case, we'll get to Intune later, can be used to configure these policies and deliver them in an enterprise scale and management to Windows 10 devices. Now, to do that and to do it effectively, we do need to pull back the covers a bit to understand Application Guard, what it is, right? In fact, this is going to be a session that spends most of its time detailing Application Guard and a smaller amount of time detailing actually the Config Manager integration, but it all fits together fairly nicely to be able to have the discussion. So here's our agenda and where we're headed with this discussion. So specifically, we'll deal with this kind of agenda and then quickly move into the fun stuff. So in terms of what is Windows Defender Application Guard, so this is something that is a Windows 10 thing only. It's a component of Windows 10. It's built in. Basically, you just need to enable it. There are two modes of operation for Application Guard. There is a standalone mode where you can enable it if you're a user or whatever, and you can effectively launch a session in Application Guard. Let me just go ahead and say this. In terms of what is Application Guard, it is an isolated, protected environment that can work with Edge when you browse websites, and it can also work with Office applications, specifically Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, right? And so the idea behind this is there are common attack vectors that intruders might want to use, web pages being one of them. And so if you have your users have Application Guard enabled on their PC, when they open documents that come from an external source, one that is not trusted, and that'll be a big component of the discussion here in a minute, or they go to a website that is not trusted, then they will have their Office application session or their Edge session opened in a protected, isolated environment so that the underlying operating system is protected from any kind of impact of malicious software, right? So the standalone mode, to go back to that, is where a user can kind of launch Edge in an intentional way in that protected environment. So it's really just to get familiar, just to do a bit of testing, and so on. Enterprise mode is where you're enabling this across the enterprise and wanting to manage it and have consistent deployments and policies and settings and so on, right? Now, isolation, I've already mentioned that. So isolation is, Application Guard is there to help enterprises out there that want to use this define trusted sites, and then everything that is not defined is by default untrusted, so that whenever you visit one of the untrusted sites or download files or whatever in certain untrusted scenarios, that protection will be implemented. You'll see this, and it'll make sense more perhaps in a minute. The way you define trust boundaries is by domain name. So for example, in the example you'll see in a bit, I'm going to fully trust anything that is Microsoft.com. Anything else is not trusted, and so it will launch or attempt to launch in a protected, isolated application guard environment. Right? Now, virtual. Right? This one's interesting. So what happens is, in order for application guard to do its thing, if an employee goes to an untrusted site, then application guard will be invoked, and what it does is it builds in a kind of a virtual container that again is abstracted from the operating system, so that the operating system will continue to perform as it should without any potential impact or harm from malicious code. Right? The idea, again, take a common vector, which is the web, which are documents sometimes, and work to reduce the exposure to attacks that come that way. Now, so what are WDAG policies? And here specifically, we're talking about in Configuration Manager now. So Configuration Manager is what's called an enterprise management tool, along with Intune, that is an option for deploying these WDAG configurations consistently in your environment to implement these things. Now, implementing WDAG is really not that difficult, but it's even easier whenever you use something like Configuration Manager to aid in that process. All right. So why do we care? Well, of course, because this is built-in capability. You have this. You may even be licensed for it already. So why not at least understand what it is? Maybe it's not something you want to use in all cases. Maybe it's something that will help in a niche scenario, and that's fine. But it is built in. You have the tool available to manage it, Config Manager or Intune, and just good to know, right? Enterprise-wide control. So a tool like Configuration Manager, like Intune, will be suitable for helping you really manage this in a way that makes sense in an enterprise environment, to have that consistency, that predictability, being able to reduce complexity of your deployments, and so on. In fact, I just noticed that I misspelled predictability, but that's okay. Okay, so in terms of requirements for Windows Defender Application Guard, there are a few. So let's dig into these a bit. So first, Application Guard is intended for, supported on, physical devices. So does that mean virtual devices won't work? No. Virtual devices will work fine for testing. In fact, you're going to see me do testing on virtual devices here in the presentation. So yeah, it works, but it is supported on physical devices. So you see the physical device requirements on the screen: 64-bit operating system, 8 gig of RAM, enough disk space, 5 gig is there, 4 processors. Can you install Application Guard without this configuration? By default, no. Yes, there are ways to bypass this. Again, for testing, you don't want to. In production, you probably don't want to for testing either, because it will slow things down, but you can. These are the requirements for the physical devices. You'll see more about that in a minute. Windows 10. So again, Windows 10 is the operating system where this is built in. There are 2 modes of operation. There's standard mode, there's enterprise mode. We will focus on enterprise mode, but we will see standalone. There is a concept called network isolation policy. So network isolation policy is this place that you define what is your trusted environment, what is not in the list of trusted will then by default be untrusted. This is a component that you must have configured in order to make Application Guard work, right? Absolutely have to. You're going to see as I go through the demo, you'll get a good flavor of how this works, but it's not going to be a huge, robust configuration, because that's really not the point. But I do have isolation policy in place because it would not work without that. And then Hyper-V. Now that one's an interesting thing to talk about for a minute. Yes, Hyper-V is required for Application Guard. Does the Hyper-V component need to be enabled on a Windows 10 workstation? And the answer is absolutely not. Yes, the Hyper-V components are used by Application Guard to build the virtualized environment, but you don't need to have the full feature of Hyper-V enabled. In fact, whenever you install Application Guard, it will install what all it needs to get its job done, and you will notice if you go back after the fact, Hyper-V won't be installed, right? But Hyper-V will be used to build the isolated virtualized environment that is needed. A couple of things. You do need to have your BIOS configured for allowing virtualization. You need the CPU virtualization extension. So a couple of things you might need: extended page tables, or this is also known as second level address translation support. And you need either VT-X for your system that's Intel or AMD -X, right? Another word about virtualization. So you, again, need the ability to have a virtualization environment loaded in order to support Application Guard. So I'm going to be showing you Application Guard on virtual machines, right? Virtual machines don't typically, you don't think of enabling Hyper-V on a virtual machine because it's already virtual. Well, you can enable what's called nested virtualization and need to enable nested virtualization on virtual machines so that the Hyper-V environment that is needed can be installed and built by Application Guard. Okay, in terms of browsers, right? Edge and Internet Explorer are both supported browsers. This was built for Edge. Internet Explorer, if it encounters a need to launch Application Guard, will launch it in Edge. We're going to focus on Edge in our demos. Also, there are browser extensions that you can add for third-party browsers. So specifically, Chrome and Firefox do have extensions where you can add them as needed. Okay, and then just a couple more points. So again, we're going to spend our time focused on Edge as the way to demo this, but as I mentioned, Application Guard is fully supported for Office, well, at least 3 apps in Office: Word, PowerPoint, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, right? I'm not going to show you Office. You'll see some indications of Office as I go through some pages here in a bit, but I'm not going to show you Office. The other thing you need is to have your diagnostic data set appropriately. Now, you can do this through Config Manager. You can do it also through your Settings app. In Privacy, there's the Diagnostics and Feedback section that you need to have there. Okay. And then finally, there's the management system. So again, we're focused today on Endpoint Manager. There's Config Manager, which is our topic today. There's Intune, which we'll cover in a future session. Group Policy, you will see me use to configure this and demonstrate it. Third-party MDM can also configure this. In fact, MDM is actually the way Configuration Manager configures this as well. You will see it in a minute. So before we start to edge toward the fun stuff, let's talk about some scenarios. So I mentioned that Application Guard was designed for physical machines. There's really 4 scenarios that we describe in our documentation where we envision this playing. The first is enterprise desktops. So these would be systems that are domain joined, managed by your organization. Configuration management is primarily done through Endpoint Manager, either Config Manager or Intune. Typically, the employees will have standard user privileges on these devices and likely will be in a high-speed wired corporate network scenario, right? Conversely, enterprise mobile laptops are very similar, except here you might have your connectivity through wireless, high-speed wireless. Then we have BYOD mobile laptops. These are laptops that your employees may own. They bring them. They are not domain joined, but they are managed by your organization, again, using typically Config Manager or Intune. Here a difference is that very often the user would be expected to be an admin on their device. And still, again, the high-speed requirements go along. And then personal devices, finally, these are own desktop or mobile laptops. Again, not domain joined. User is typically an admin, and again, high-speed connectivity. So how does all this work? Well, I'm going to show you a couple of diagrams. Oh, I mentioned the operational modes already, standalone, enterprise. So how does this all work? Well, there's a couple of diagrams that I'll show you. And I'm really not going to dig into them in detail. You can pause the video if you like and look at these on the screen and kind of go through it. This is just illustrating how Application Guard works with Edge, works with the Office products, and so on. And then also this one is a bit of a flowchart showing you the decision tree about when Application Guard is called and invoked versus whenever just standard capabilities are used, or say different way, Edge directly browses to a web page without the Application Guard environment protection. Okay, that's setting the stage. Now let's get into this and have a little bit of fun. And specifically, what I mean by that is exploring what this looks like in the various configurations. So to do that, I want to start with standalone mode. And I want to bring in a VM that I'm using to demonstrate standalone mode. So let me grab the virtual machine. Here it is. And so a couple of things I want to show you first. The first is enabling Application Guard. And so this is a virtual machine. So in Control Panel, if I go to Programs and Features, then I'm going to see as a feature Windows Defender Application Guard. And this is enabled. I did enable it, no problem. So you'll see it's enabled. Right? So first thing, Application Guard's enabled. Hyper-V is not. Right? So the full feature Hyper-V is not enabled. Application Guard is. Now, this is a virtual machine. And so whenever I first, let me show you also. So if I minimize this and go to settings, right, the way I have this virtual machine configured is with 8 gig of memory, 4 processors, and then plenty of hard drive space. Now that may not be, you may not have the ability or desire to build such a large virtual machine just for testing, but and you don't have to. I mean, I did just to turn it on because I had the ability and so on. But if you don't, then when you come in here, you're going to find Application Guard is grayed out. You cannot enable it, right? In fact, I don't remember a single time that I've been able to go into a virtual machine and enable Application Guard, even if I met all of the prerequisites. Another one being that you need nested virtualization turned on. And so if you run into that, once you get into the situation and you know that your prerequisites are met, you can absolutely enable Application Guard with PowerShell. And that's what I did. So if you want to, let me grab the PowerShell command line. You can install the feature with PowerShell. The only thing about it is whenever you do this with PowerShell, it's going to enable it. It's not going to check any prereqs or anything else to make sure that things are configured correctly and all of the things are needed, right? And so here's the command line in PowerShell to enable Application Guard. And that's what I did here. Now, how do I know Application Guard is enabled? Well, it's easy to visualize. So if I go into Services and look under Application Guard Container Service, it's here. Now, after you run that PowerShell script, you may very well see that Application Guard service is not running, right? Why would it not be running on a VM? Well, because maybe certain things that it expects to be in place or certain configurations that it expects to be there are not there. And I'll show you in the event log in a minute where you can find out maybe why the service isn't starting. But once you get that fixed, which again, stay tuned, you can go ahead and start the service. Now, how do you know that Application Guard is truly enabled on the machine? Because if you go into Edge and click on the ellipses, you will see new Application Guard window. So again, this is standalone. And so standalone to me is just to kind of get your feet wet and understand what's going on. It's not the exciting way to use Application Guard. You know, if I were to click on this and decide, hey, launch Application Guard, it's going to launch Edge in an Application Guard mode. You will see that up here, you'll get a visual indicator. I may not wait for this to fully load. You'll get a visual indicator that Application Guard is actually turned on. You're browsing in Application Guard. I'm not going to wait on this, but you see that it's trying to launch. Now, because this is a virtual machine, because it's competing with other virtual machines on this host, it's delayed a little bit, and that's okay, right? The first time it loads, there it goes, actually. The first time it loads, it will be delayed a little bit. And then subsequent loads should be much faster, but you do see the visual indicator that you are now in Edge in an Application Guard environment, right? So that's as far as I really care to take the demo on standalone, because standalone is really not where we're going to be playing, where we're going to be interested. So let me get this virtual machine out of the way. All right. Let's shift to something that is perhaps more interesting, because it starts to move into the enterprise mindset toward deploying Application Guard. And so what I'm going to do here is pull in another VM that is configured to have Application Guard enabled through group policy. And I want to show you a few things. So the same requirements apply. I'm going to quickly go through as soon as I get logged in and show you that this is all configured and so on. Okay, so popping into Control Panel real quick, we are, there we go. Come on, let me type. Still looks like it's coming up a bit. Wait a little bit longer. Okay, looks like it's progressed a bit further now. Let's try it again. Control Panel. There we go. All right, good. So just to show you, it is enabled. And while it's coming up, let's just look at the settings of the VM again. So settings, I don't remember if this one's set with all the prereqs or not. I can't recall. So no, this one has one virtual processor. This one does not have all the RAM, so just 2 gigs. So the result is this will be incredibly slow with Application Guard. In fact, may not even launch in a timely way, but that's okay. This is a good demo. So I have, under Programs and Features, I do in fact have Application Guard configured. So if I go to Programs and Features, let that list populate and scroll on down, then you will see I have Application Guard. It is enabled. It's enabled because I use PowerShell, which again forces this, but it doesn't necessarily mean the service is going to start. So let's just look at services. All right, and you will see that Application Guard service is in fact started, which only happened because I used the registry. This only started because I used the registry to bypass the requirements of 8 gig of RAM, 4 processors, and so on, right? Which you'll see again in a minute. But this is on, right? And the other way that I know this is on is I go into Edge, and it's here on the menu, Application Guard, right? So I'm just going to try. This may be really uncooperative because it's 4 gig of RAM, but I'm going to try to go to Google and see what happens. You should see, hopefully, that Application Guard session will load, but I'm not going to wait on that, right? Not going to wait on that. Let me just pull this off to the side. If I can grab it. There, well, Application Guard is starting to load. You saw, so let's pull this off to the side. Application Guard's loading. And so how did I configure this? This is not standalone. This is what's called enterprise mode. So there's, this is where I would configure these settings through group policy, right? And so this, I'm going to show you in local policy. I used local policy to configure this, but that's not what you would do in an enterprise environment. You would use domain policy likely, and that's a comment too. Even though you can enable it this way, it may be suitable for you. We are really encouraging folks to eliminate their dependence on on-prem AD, right? And so group policy keeps you completely tied into on-prem AD. And so there's other ways that you will see in a minute where you can implement this without policy at all, using MDM, Configuration Service Provider. That's actually how Config Manager and Intune implement this, right? Okay, So let's look at the GPOs. In fact, you see it's loading. It's running very slowly as a result. So I'm just going to let this all come up, and then I'll be able to show it to you. Okay, so my policy, MMC, came up in the background, so let's just go ahead to that. I'm going to maximize it. So to configure Application Guard, there's two groups of settings that you need to factor in. The first is the network isolation settings, and we must configure those for sure. Otherwise, this won't kick on and work at all, right? So then this, and here Application Guard went ahead, it looks like, and tried to open. So we'll see. Again, it's creeping along pretty slow. There it goes. So you can see Application Guard is up and running. I'm going to shut this down because it's consuming a lot of resources that I would rather it not do. So close all. Okay. So in the MMC, let me see if I can reposition this. Okay, cool. So I want to go up first under administrative templates. There's network. And under network, we will see network isolation. And under network isolation, there's really one of two, I've got both of them configured, settings that you need. So the first one here, where you want to set enterprise resource domains that are hosted in the cloud, what I'm basically doing is configuring a trusted domain name. In this case, Microsoft.com. So if I go to Microsoft.com for anything, it's going to open an edge without any problem at all. It's not going to launch an Application Guard protected environment, isolated environment. We do support wildcarding here, so what that means is if you put two dots in front of it, so .Microsoft.com, that means if I go to tools.microsoft, these are probably fake domain names, but tools.microsoft.com, that will load. If I go to joes.tools.microsoft.com, that will load, because any of the domain names that would have Microsoft.com in the name would then be trusted. You can also add multiple domains to this list if you want to, with either, can't remember if this is bar or semicolon delimited, but one of the two. And so if it's not in this list, it's not going to be trusted. Again, not trusted does not mean known malicious. It just means you're not vetting for it to be safe, right? So it's going to launch in Application Guard just to be sure. So that's one of the two. And then there's another setting here where you're saying, okay, hey, this is going to be a domain that's categorized as both personal and work. In that case, it's going to be Bing, right? So that there are other settings here that you can configure for isolation, network isolation. You do have to have these couple configured. I know at least that one, I'm sketchy a little bit on that one, but either way. And then you have optional ones. Now, once you have this configured, then you can go to the Application Guard policies. And I'll show you again, you saw a minute ago where it is, but I'm not going to go through every single thing here. Oops, here, Application Guard. So there are a number of policies here, and there's ones that are beyond even here, as I recall, that you can find elsewhere. But the point of this is you're going to define how Application Guard acts when it's in Application Guard mode. So there's certain settings here that might be of interest. So things like persistence, right? So when you launch Application Guard in its separate mode, users might be in there, they might try to save shortcuts or favorites, for example. And persistence mode decides, yes, you're either going to allow that, and that way when they close Application Guard mode and then reopen it, the favorites stay along, or every time they close out of Application Guard, the favorites get deleted, so it's not persisted, right? There's other modes in here, such as allow files to be downloaded through Application Guard, allow copy and paste or clipboard usage during Application Guard, and so on. The one setting you must have here is this one on the top. Turn on Windows Defender Application Guard in managed mode. you have to turn that on. And then you have some options how you want that to run. So option 3, as you can see, supports Defender and also Office. But I don't care. Again, this is really not an application guard session. It's more of a config manager session. So I'm just doing Edge, and I set the option to 1. And you've already seen that that all of this works just fine without any problem at all. And so that's setting this up through group policy, right? And a lot of nuances. We could do a session or series of sessions just on application mode. Now, again, just to show you, GPOs, not all the time, but in many cases, GPOs just basically set registry keys. And that's true of Application Guard as well. So there are registry keys that are the equivalent to GPOs. So let me show you. So if I open the registry editor and navigate to the right place. Oh, good. So it opened up by default. And navigate to the right place. And there are a couple of different places this might show up. This is focused on network isolation. I configured .microsoft.com and Bing, right? And so you will see right here, my cloud resources is set appropriately. My neutral resources is set appropriately. Here's the registry path. That was set because I configured the policy. And so I'm not going to belabor the point. The other settings are in here too and would show up in different locations, but they're out there, right? And again, WDAG is working. Now, one thing about this, whenever you first configure and enable WDAG, then your system will need a reboot in order to get that done, right? I've already had mine installed, and so I don't need a reboot, but if you turn it on in the control panel or if you turn it on through PowerShell, you will be prompted for a reboot, right? Okay. Now let's have fun with Configuration Manager. So you see the basics and how that works, how it's configured. Let's go into Configuration Manager and see what's going on, right? So the beauty of Config Manager, you can tell that wasn't real hard to do with group policy, but the beauty of Config Manager is it's going to use a more modern approach, the configuration service provider that's part of MDM. And also, you don't have to even manage it at the policy level. You can manage it through Config Manager nicely and do all sorts of iterations that you might need. So one question came up whenever you're doing Config Manager policy: is there a way to set precedents? And the answer is no. The general philosophy here would be that you would build your default settings as you want, and then if there's things that you need to add on top of, that you would add them on top of, and then kind of those would be set accordingly. I've not tested that. That's the way I believe it works because there is no precedence, but nevertheless. Okay, so in Configuration Manager, you can go into the Application Guard node, and you see that I have demo configuration already set up. But let's walk through it and create a new one, right? So Application Guard, let's go create a new one. Okay. So the first thing you're going to give it is a name. I don't care, right? Test, and you're going to decide whether you enable or disable the service, right? So this should install WDAG for you, right? That you shouldn't have to run any PowerShell. You shouldn't have to run any instruction telling the user to click that in the control panel, nothing like that. Now, I've not been successful doing this, and the reason that I believe that's the case is because I'm using virtual machines, and that there's some logic there that is going to prevent this from working on virtual machines. So I've not been able to experience this myself in terms of getting WDAG enabled on my virtual machines, and I've had to do it manually, but nevertheless, it should work just fine. Let me show you the policy I've created. So again, I'm not interested in this session in going through all the details of the policy settings and so on, except what's necessary to demonstrate this. So you'll see I have categories for application behavior and all of the different things that I might want to do there. There's clipboard settings, there's printing options, and different things that you might want to enable, you would want to manage in different ways in your environment. There's interactions with the host. There's file management stuff. And this one I think should be first because it contains the settings that you must have first. This is where I have my cloud resources and my neutral resources. So this is the exact same setting that I had in GPO, right? So I've got this deployed right here, right? Very easy. All you do is target it to a device collection. And this is going to be the name of my deployment. So let's go look on my demo client and see what this actually looks like. So pulling that in, actually, let me go get that. Okay, got it. Okay, so pulling that in, this is my config manager client. So if I open the control panel here and look at my configuration manager client, you're going to see that, in fact, the configuration, which is right here, AppGuard, shows compliant. And it is, right? AppGuard is functional on this machine. If I look in programs and features, you will see that it is, in fact, enabled. Again, I had to do that myself in this case, but it should take care of it for you with Configuration Manager. So WDAG is enabled, right? And if I look at Edge, you'll see that it is enabled. So you know the service is running. Everything seems to be working correctly, right? Okay. So that's good to know that it comes down as a configuration, as a compliance policy, and so on, that you can see in the Config Manager applet. No problem. You can see that this is working, hopefully. Hopefully, whenever I open the browser, things will be fast enough that it will launch. And if I go to Google, since it's not trusted, it will kick off Application Guard and launch there. There you go, right? So you see it is working. All of that was done with Configuration Manager and so on, right? Now, I mentioned this is implemented by configuration items. And so whenever I first started doing this, I always want to know, hey, where does this actually get enabled, right? And I've mentioned already that this gets enabled using the configuration service provider. I didn't go there first, right? The first place I went was GPO. And so I wanted to see, hey, where this is all working, where did it go? Well, I stopped in network isolation. This is GPO, and not a single one of these settings are configured. So I thought, well, something's weird here. So I dug a little bit deeper. I'll show you that in a minute. And I realized this is actually coming down through the configuration service provider. So what does that look like? Well, if I go to the registry here, and I look under Policy Manager, two places. Here's the HVSI node. This is actually where you can. Let me pause here. I'm glad I opened it up here. I've already mentioned that to make this work on a VM, you do have to bypass certain configurations. That's what I'm going to show you here. I'm going to show it to you and then move on since I'm already here. There's 3 registry keys that you can put in place. Here is specify required free disk space. So I'm leaving this as, you'd have to create these as DWORD. I'm leaving this at 5, no big deal. Required memory in gigabytes. Notice my configuration is 0. Why is it 0? Well, I'll show you in a minute, right? And then finally, the number of processors I set to 1. Now, this VM has 8 gig of RAM. It also has 4 virtual processors. But again, I'll show you in a minute why I set this to 0. And that doesn't really matter, so on, right? Okay, but while I'm in here, let me go show you where you would see that in fact this is enabled on a machine through Config Manager. So if I go down to Policy Manager right here, right, and look down into Current and then Device, you're going to see this configuration. And so these are the configurations for Windows Defender Application Guard. But then here are the network isolation configurations, and you see, being here, you see Microsoft.com here. So not to belabor these configurations, but the point is a couple of fold. One, it is configured. You see it working. Two, Config Manager and Intune are not leveraging GPO at all. They are leveraging the configuration service provider, which is part of the MDM stack, to make these configurations. So this is the more modern approach to be able to enable application guards. So this is definitely working. No problem. You see that it is, and we are good to go, right? All right. So now, moving toward wrapping the session up, I want to talk about a few troubleshooting tips and tricks as we start to close out. So I've already mentioned in terms of troubleshooting, you can have some challenges enabling application guard on a virtual machine. I've already mentioned that. If you don't see the application guard component available to you in control panel, or you don't want to enable it that way, that's fine. Make sure that your prerequisites are enabled. You can always enable it with PowerShell directly, which will bypass the prereq checks, or you can enable it with Config Manager on a physical machine. I've had problems, again, haven't been able to confirm it on virtual machines, right? Make sure that the application guard service is running in the services applet. So I've shown that to you a few times. And then let me bring the virtual machine back in, because if you're having continued trouble, this event log, the event logs that we provide for application guard can be very, very helpful. So you're going to find those under applications and services, which takes a second to expand. Oh, that was quicker. And then under Microsoft, there we go. And then under Windows, if you scroll down to the bottom, you're going to see 5 WDAG logs right here, right? So I've not really explored these, any of these except for service, right? So if the service isn't starting, this is a good place to look. You see that my service is just fine, but it wasn't always. And so if I go down to the 200-ish events, and let's see, which one is it? There we go, right? So this is event ID 200, and look, it's going to tell you, and this is when I was having trouble, it's going to tell you, hey, the gigabytes of RAM required is 8. I'm not detecting any. Now, I don't know why it's not detecting any, because it certainly had 8, but it wasn't. And so I'm kind of attributing this to maybe a bug in this build of Windows 10, but it's easy to bypass. And I've not tested on the most recent builds of Windows 10 so far, but this is a good illustration to show how you can use this event log to kind of troubleshoot why things might not be lining up the way that you think they should, or the way that you expect them to, right? And several other event logs there that will be full of good information as well, right? I've already shown you where you can use the registry to bypass the requirements of gigabytes and number of processors and so on with, for example, spec required free disk space in gigabytes, spec required memory in gigabytes, spec required processor count, and so on. So that's all there. I've shown that to you. One thing that I do want to show you here as well, and this is whenever I realized that this was not coming down through group policy, I wanted to understand what exactly we were doing to enable this. And so I went into Configuration Manager and tried to trace this, and I want to trace it backwards with you and show you how I did it. So I'm about to go into the database, and I'm about to pull some information out of the database. And anytime I'm going to go into the database, I want to offer the caution that this is to teach you, not to encourage you to go in here yourself. If you're ever working with the database, you need to be very aware of that and make sure that you have Microsoft support on the line. If you do anything wrong in here, you can really damage things that can be very difficult to repair, right? So I'm going to go in to a new query. So there's a couple of things that I had in my set of tools as I started approaching this. First, I knew that this was coming down as a configuration item. It was in the configurations node. So that helped me hone in on what part of the database I needed to look at. Also, what I knew is that the assignment was there, and I knew the assignment name, and I could work backwards. And so where I wanted to start, or where I need to start, and there's a lot of tables here. I'm just going to show you what I did, and there's other ways to get here, but I'm going to start by looking at the assignments list. So CI_CI assignments, right? I'm going to run that query. So as I run this query, I'm going to look to see what the name of my deployment is. So here's my AppGuard deployment, and the thing that I care about is my assignment ID. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on the clipboard. And I know how these tables relate, and so I'm moving along through this pretty quick. I get that it may not be as quick if you don't understand that, but again, I'm just trying to show you how all of this works. So, and what I'm trying to do ultimately is map my assignment back to the particular configuration item that is actually deployed by that assignment. And so knowing what my assignment ID is, I can go to my next table, and that will be where I get my correlation to the configuration item. So select star from CI_assignment targeted CIs. Targeted CIs right there, right? But this time I'm going to hone in on where assignment ID equals the one I just copied. Right, there we go. So home, and I'm going to run that. All right, and so now oops, I didn't mean to select 8, typo. Here I'm going to run it again, and I will get a bit of a different result. So execute, cool. So now I have the ID, the assignment ID, and then here is the CI ID. That's what I need to pull out the specific detail from the main table that lists all of our configuration items. So select star from CI_configuration items here, configuration items, where CI_ID equals that, right? And if I go home and run that, now I've arrived at the exact configuration item that is being deployed by that deployment. So now what do I do? Well, if I want to understand what the configurations are, I'm going to look at the SDM package digest. And this is it. I'm going to copy that to Notepad and quickly show you a couple of things, right? So I'm done here. Let me minimize and Notepad. Go. All right, cool. So here's the actual XML of the configuration that is going down to the device. And so I know it is. Why? Because I see little elements in here. Here's the name of my deployment and so on. And so I know I'm in the right place. So I can learn a lot about how this is actually working by scrolling up and down through it. So I start to see deployment names or display names and description texts and so on of different settings that I could set as part of policy. But then I look down under the operands section and I see that certain ones are not set, right? And so I keep scrolling down and I see different settings. All of these are different settings and so on. But here I get to an interesting place. Under operands, I see that this setting, right, is being used as the value where the setting can be set. Well, if you've spent any time at all looking at the way MDM works and how you address MDM directly, this is that format. So this is an exact path to address the configuration service provider that will help enable this. So when I saw that, I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. We're using the configuration service provider to implement these settings. And then I went to the registry and found where that was being set. But you can see other things here, right? Let me just go on and scroll down. So value equal 1. Let's see if I can find that. Did I type that right? Value equal, oh, up. No, that's not what I want. Down. Nope. Fine. Okay, keep on going down. Let's see. Yeah, so right there, value equals 1. So this one is one that is being set. Enable or disable application guard. Well, I enabled it. And so this is set to 1. So this is the configuration that is being dropped down on the Configuration Manager client. So it will know how to process this. It will be assessed from time to time so that we can confirm that everything is set as it should be, right? So I thought that would be interesting to show y'all. In the tips and tricks section, so there are some known issues that you should be aware of in terms of the way this works, and especially version 2004 of Windows 10. I'll leave that there, since again, this is really more of a config manager session. I mentioned Office. Office definitely can be configured. I did not show you any of that, but it can be. There's some really good frequently asked questions at the URL that you see. I've already mentioned ad nauseum about virtual machines and how that works, and then there's some other interesting links from there. So Application Guard is a really cool feature. Again, you may well own it already. It's part of Windows 10, so take a look at it. If it will help you, awesome. This is a really cool feature, and here is where we will end the session. And thank you for hanging out. We will see you next time.